All right, mathletes, Mr. Antonucci here, and in this video, I want to talk about where on earth did they get the quadratic formula. I mean, this beast looks kind of crazy. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You should have that burned into your mind, particularly if you're in Algebra I and you're going to be taking more and more and more math classes. You're going to use this bad boy all the time. But where does it come from? You often don't have to know that. You just have to memorize the formula. But lots of times students want to know, where's this come from? It comes from the general form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And then what we do, and I've made videos about this, is you complete the square on the general quadratic equation using the a, b, and c instead of actual numbers. So if you remember, the first thing you do is, since the leading coefficient is not 1 here, it's a, whatever that number represents. Could be 1, but we're just going to assume it's not. Doesn't matter if it is. You divide everything by a. So divide the whole equation by a, and you would end up with x squared. A divided by a just gives you x squared. Bx divided by a would be b over a times x, plus c divided by a would be c over a, equals 0 divided by a, 0. Okay? Now, when we complete the square, what we do is we isolate the quadratic term and the linear term. And if there's a constant term, which this c over a, remember c, a, b, and c just represent numbers. They're not necessarily variables. We want to get rid of that. So we subtract it to the other side, and you get x squared plus b over a x equals negative c over a. And then what we do is we take this bad boy here and complete the square. Now, again, I've made videos on completing the square. So if you're not familiar with that, go ahead and check those out. But the basic process is you take half of the number in front of x and square it. So half of b over a and square it, and you would get b squared over 4a squared. Then you take that number, whatever that represents, and you add it to both sides. So you'd have x squared plus b over a x plus b squared over 4a squared equals negative c over a plus, actually, let me write it like this. Let me write it, we're going to add the b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. Okay, that looks like a 5. Okay, now this left side, we just forced it to be a perfect square trinomial, and those always factor into x plus or minus whatever you squared up here. Well, we factored plus, or we squared plus b over 2a. Now this, we want to clean that up. What we need to do is get a common denominator so that we can subtract them. This and this, the common denominator would be 4a squared. You just need another factor of a and a 4 here, so we're going to multiply this by 4a. So you would have b squared minus, this is c times 4 times a, which, because multiplication you can multiply in any order, you could write as 4ac, all over 4a squared. This already has 4a squared, and you have a times 4 times a, which is 4a squared. Okay, you can see it's starting to take place now, start to take shape. Now, since we're squared here and we're trying to solve for x, you take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. Make that look a little more like a square root. Okay, then the left side is going to be x plus b over 2a equals, and now remember, I told you before, when you square root, take the square root of a fraction, you could take the square root of the numerator plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over the square root of the denominator. Square root of 4 is 2. And since whatever a was, we squared it, now we're just reversing that by taking the square root. We get 2a. Now to solve for x, you just subtract b over 2a from both sides. And you would have x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And since these both have a factor or a denominator of 2a, you can write it as a single fraction with a common denominator of 2a. And you have negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the quadratic formula. So maybe you can memorize how I did this and go into class and tell your teacher, say, hey, I know where the quadratic formula came from. Maybe you could try that one. All right, guys, hope that was helpful to you. If you have a problem or a question that you'd like me to make a video about, please do drop it in the comments and maybe I'll make a video about it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel also and hit the bell for notifications when new videos are uploaded. You take care now.